Is Adam and Eve a metaphor? The story of Adam and Eve is known all around the world, regardless of your wisdom tradition. And today, we're going to explore a completely different perspective that might just change our view of creation. Is the story of Adam and Eve a metaphor? Was the apple in the story of Adam and Eve a metaphor? How can new interpretations of old stories allow for our soul's evolution? How can the story of Adam and Eve as metaphor open us to new possibilities and guide us forward? I can't wait to hear in the comments any thoughts that you have about a completely different perspective on the role of the sacred feminine in the creation story. Is the story of Adam and Eve a metaphor? First of all, I invite you to take a look at a previous video that I did called What is the Purpose of Metaphor in Personal Development? Now, with the idea that metaphor is a symbolic representation of something else, yes, we can absolutely look at the story of Adam and Eve as a metaphor. The story of Adam and Eve is symbolic of a number of things, one of which is separation, right? We're separating from God in that story. There's a separation in the Garden of Eden that's happening, a separation from paradise, right? So there's this metaphor of human beings' capacity to separate from wholeness, from truth, from the full experience of freedom and love and wisdom. It's also a metaphor for awareness and lack of awareness, right? There's a lot in that story, and I'm not going to go into the whole story. I'm going to trust because so many people know this story. But there's this concept of what are we fully aware of and what are we not aware of, and what causes us to be aware or not aware. It's also a metaphor for our capacity to fall from grace based on our choices, our stories, our fears. We get caught up in all of these things, and then we can kind of separate ourselves or become less aware. It's almost like we fall asleep or we're not paying attention, and we create through our choices all of these ways in which we fall from grace. We disconnect from this incredible nourishment that is available to us. The story can also be a metaphor for the concept of masculine and feminine and interactions that happen there. We could also be looking at as spirit and soul. Masculine is also often associated with spirit, so you can have the character of Adam there representing that. The soul is often connected with the feminine, and we can have the character of Eve representing that. Again, this is not about gender, but rather this idea of, okay, there's a separation here. There's a separation into contrast, into a sense of polarity, into a sense of duality. So we're seeing this concept of these representations that this story can be a metaphor for. It also can be a metaphor for the gift of freedom, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. So what about the apple in the story of Adam and Eve? Well, this too is a metaphor. We can think of it as a metaphor. It can be a metaphor for our capacity to have free will, right? There's a choice, there's a free will to take a bite out of that apple. With that power of choice comes a capacity to see beyond what is known, to maybe take some risks, maybe go outside of a comfort zone. I wonder why Apple as a company has an apple with a bite out of it as its symbol. They are known for challenging the status quo with everything that they do. So isn't that an interesting concept to consider? I want to present here today a new interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve. Now, I want to preface by saying so much of my work has stemmed from my own passion and love for fairy tales and folklore and mythology, and being able to look at them in ways that are metaphorical and archetypal. Years and years went where I would look at stories, whether it was sacred texts like the Bible, I grew up in the Christian tradition, or other sacred texts as I learned to incorporate more diverse wisdom traditions into my own spirituality. And of course, it was very easy to want to literalize all of those and to look at the story and say, this is the story and how it happened and exactly what it means, which honestly frustrated me growing up. And so when I learned about the concept of metaphor, and how we could take a story or an experience or anything, even an object, and interpret it in different ways, relate to it on a personal level, everything began to change. And so one day I was actually in a women's Facebook group of all things, and someone was talking about the story of Adam and Eve. And out of the blue, I just wrote this very fascinating dialogue of a different kind of conversation between the snake and Eve. And it was looking at this concept of, what if the feminine were looked at very, very differently? What we have right now in our patriarchal dominance culture is a story of Adam and Eve that says, woman is bad. She's the one who ate from the apple and defied God and succumbed to temptation. If we look at things from another perspective, from a more evolutionary perspective of where human beings are, where we might be going, where we could be going, perhaps even different ideas about why we're here in the first place. Like, what is it that created this experience of duality, of polarity? One of the greatest things that I came upon in my studies of different wisdom traditions and just considerations of God was this idea of creation happening so that God could know itself, right? Source could know itself. And we can't know the light without the dark, right? We can't understand spirit fully without matter and a contrast. We live in a world of tremendous contrast, right? We see the concept of spirit and matter in our inner world and the outer world. We see the concept of light and dark, right? We have extremes, even if you want to look at it in political terms, like the left and the right, right? We are constantly seeing these aspects of contrast. In my own contemplations, I got to thinking about, like, well, what if this story had something different to consider about the role of the masculine and the feminine in this expression of contrast? Like, what is needed? What is the real role of Eve? Because from day one, I never bought the idea that Eve was just a sinner, a tainted woman who ate of the apple and defied God. I feel that these stories have so much more to tell us, right? So much more to give to us. I'm going to actually tell you this story, and I want us to look at this from the vantage point of Eve being this representation of the sacred feminine. You still have Adam there, but we're going to leave Adam out of this story for the moment. And we'll get back to that after I share this story with you, okay? And I want us to think about the snake. Many of us have heard of the term Lucifer, this fallen from grace being. Now, Lucifer also means bringer of light, which is quite interesting. You have this fallen being that ends up being the bringer of light. There's something very interesting there. And the snake has always been a very, very potent symbol for the feminine. Okay, and so here we have the snake that's looked at as evil. We have Eve that's looked at as evil. And I want us to explore a new possibility. So I ask, as you hear this story, that you remain open and consider possibilities. So I am going to read this story to you. I do think I'll be better to read it so I don't forget things. So I'm going to read these parts and let you know who's speaking. And I invite you to just sit back and listen to this story. So first we have the snake addressing Eve. Eve, Creator has created you in his image. And to be in Creator's likeness, that is to be a creator in love and wisdom. You must know not only the good laid out for you here in the Garden of Eden, but also the darkness from which all of creation was born. And Eve replies, "What does that darkness look like?" The snake replies to Eve saying, "At first, that darkness can feel terrifying. It will make you question existence itself. You will question who you are, why you are here, and what life is all about. Things may not seem so beautiful in the darkness. Love and kindness might even feel inaccessible. You will feel confused, indecisive, overwhelmed, and even exhausted at times." And Eve replies to the snake, "Why would I want to go to this darkness when there is so much peace and beauty here in the garden?" To which the snake says, In knowing this darkness, Eve, you will understand the longing for unity that inspired creation. More importantly, in knowing the darkness, human beings will have true freedom to choose the love and wisdom of creation. You see, without knowing this contrast, there can be no true freedom to choose. You will have to dig deep within yourself to find the spirit seed within you that remembers the pure love and wisdom of the Creator, and choose the way to the Creator if you are to find your way out of the darkness. Eve says, "But I'm already out of darkness. Why would I want to go there only to find my way back out again?" And the snake says, Creator believes in human beings as being just as powerful as Creator is, and wants them to realize this power. This creative power only comes in knowing the darkness. True creative power creates out of the darkness in love and wisdom, creating what is beneficial for all of life and what will serve life and creation for all of eternity. It requires courage and fortitude to create out of darkness, to choose love and wisdom over the temptation of personal gain and satisfaction. Eve replies, "I don't understand personal gain. All here are my brothers and sisters. I have no reason for personal gain when all of my needs are met here in the garden." And the snake says to Eve, "Exactly, Eve. There is no understanding of the temptation of personal gain or the creative power of truly creating in freedom, because you do not know the darkness yet. To be as Creator, you must know the darkness and choose the light of love and wisdom of your own accord for all of creation in all that you do. Creator made you strong as woman, Eve. You will have the capacity to understand this darkness and find your way out. You have the strength to show other human beings how to choose love and wisdom and become co-creators in perfect balance with God. You will be the mother of humanity, true humanity, as Creator longs for you to experience through your courage to face the darkness and choose in freedom. Will you take up this task of bringing humanity to the place of co-creator with God? Eve replies, "What do I have to do in order to take up this task?" The snake says, "You must eat from this apple. It is a taste from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It is a taste of contrasts, which will allow you to see and experience the darkness as the source of life. It will allow you the freedom to be a mediator between spirit and matter, heaven and earth, light and darkness, reconciling them in perfect balance that will bring the eternal existence of heaven on earth as human beings create it." Eve thinks for a moment, and then she replies, "If human beings are truly as Creator, then humanity can share in the magic and support Creator in birthing, sustaining, and renewing this beautiful existence. I would like to share this with my Creator. Pass the apple." And the snake replies, "While I appreciate his love of creation, man alone was not able to connect to the wisdom of creation as woman is." Thank you, Eve. So this version of the story obviously is a very, very stark contrast to seeing Eve and the snake as being these representatives of a fall from grace, and perhaps instead looking at this as representatives of a rise to awareness, a rise to understanding, a rise to reconciliation in total freedom. Beginning to see stories in this way, to look at stories like Adam and Eve as metaphor, we begin to shift our entire concept of what may be possible in our lives and what perhaps history. Remember, the winners write the history books, right? And we've already found with the Gnostic Gospels things that were left out of the Bible often in the interest of power, in the interest of keeping people in a certain belief system so that it was easier to control and dominate. There are many other stories in the Bible that can be interpreted in different ways to consider, why did the feminine go underground? Why, if this story were a possibility, why would Eve have not been able to help lead us out of the darkness by now, right? Why would this have happened? Maybe the snake could have said more around how forgetful we would be. Here in English, the word human comes from the same root as humus, right? Like the earth. But the word human, I think it's in Arabic, is one who forgets, which is interesting because there is a forgetting here, and it's in the forgetting that we're able to see contrast, that we're able to see the duality, we're able to be polarized, and we're able to choose in freedom what we do to reconcile all of that and ultimately return to Source as co-creators. I love this idea of exploring this possibility. Now, what guidance can be provided from the story of Adam and Eve as metaphor? Obviously here I have taken a new interpretation and looked at this, but there are some similar interpretations that we can look at. You know, the idea of Adam as masculine or spirit and Eve as feminine or soul, and the snake as some level of opportunity to reconcile those, to reunite those, to come back into this Garden of Eden that so many of us aspire toward on our journey. Now, the focus I've chosen to bring is a focus on bringing a different story for the sake of women's empowerment, but that doesn't mean we disregard the spirit. I could go on with the story, we could talk about what happens next, what moves on, how the masculine is critical in our journey, and that is all part of what I do in my program, like Solace and Wisdom of Fairy Tales and other things like that. The apple can be this metaphor for participation in life, for showing up, for being willing to be a part of something, right? To take a chance, to open ourselves up to new possibilities. Unfortunately, a lot of the original stories were written and communicated in ways that keep us small, that keep us thinking inside of boxes and don't allow for us to consider other possibilities. The garden is a metaphor for that which is within us and available to us at all times. And we're banished by choice and we can return by choice. And this is the quality of true freedom that is available to human beings that I think so often we don't think about. We don't recognize that we really do have this power of choice. And of course, we've abused that power of choice again and again, and we can look at history to see all the ways in which we've done so. But it's through that power of choice that we have an opportunity to find heaven on earth. This is one interpretation, and I had a lot of fun doing this. I invite you, share other interpretations, share other ideas. I do ask, please be kind in the comments. Please be thoughtful that these are just ideas. Nobody is saying what is or what isn't. I deeply, deeply respect all wisdom traditions and honor all ideas. And I understand that hearing a story in a different way may trigger some questions. It may threaten, ways of knowing, ways of seeing things. These are all possibilities. And my goal here on this channel, supporting women to become their most empowered self, is to give us examples of how to look at things differently, how to see things differently, how to begin to realize that the stories that we've held in our lives and in our expression are not necessarily exactly the way we interpret them. There could be other interpretations. There could be other perspectives. There could be other ways of seeing them. And obviously we can apply this concept of the story of Adam and Eve as metaphor to other wisdom traditions, other sacred texts, other stories, to take a look at how can this show up. You know, I love doing that with fairy tales. I love playing around with it in other ways. There's a blog that I have on my website that is talking about the Passion of the Christ, also as like an archetype or a way of interpreting it that can help us to see our own trial and tribulation in a different way. Looking at things differently is critical for us to have our own soul's evolution and for us to truly become more empowered and fulfilled on this journey called life. I'll see you next time.